We know we've already encountered some things. But,
yeah. So, hello all. It's good to see everybody. But I want to make sure that we have all the information. It's been an interesting exercise to put these things together, for sure. So there is. Then we should have more people joining us shortly. Do we have like a popcorn thing we want to do, Beth, before we launch? I'll let you and Mike and whoever kind of think about that.
Well, it's something we did yesterday on a call was just ask everybody what their expectations for this call today are, to make sure we're all on the same page before we jumped off the cliff.
Get a little common understanding of what's waiting for us at the bottom.
I was going to say, as long as there's water,
Yeah.
or we have a parachute on, I'm cool.
I never, ever would jump off a cliff.
Yeah, no jumping off a cliff, no diving off an airplane. Not for me.
That's fun. Come on, guys.
Oh, Richard.
I mean.
So your question is about what expectations? What are your expectations on the call?
For this call today.
Was that directed at me?
No, well, we could. It will be eventually.
Oh.
Unless somebody else has another question they're burning to have answered.
Can we do a not work related question? Just to kind of, I don't know. But that's usually my go-to. Mike, do you have or Christine, do you have a warm-up question just to kind of get us flowing? Something around cliffs and diving? I don't know.
Yeah, what was the last cliff you dive off?
Yeah, what was the biggest risk you take? Yeah, yeah, exactly. That could be the question if you want to go with that theme. Mike, what do you got?
What was the question?
I was just saying we can go off the theme of like, what's the biggest risk you've taken?
What's the biggest risk you've taken?
I guess it's like a self-perceived one or one that other people would say that you've taken. Because I would say like a risk that people think I take a lot of, but I don't think it's a risk, is taking like personal sabbaticals.
I like it. Good question.
Great. And then we'll dive into the work question for sure, Beth. All right. So, Christine, you started.
Oh, I guess, okay, that's like an external thing. So it's not really a thing that I think is a big risk now, because I think I took the risk the first time when I had a really high risk tolerance when I was younger. But I do a practice of taking life sabbaticals. So I kind of live by the notion of like the energy when you wake up. If you like hit the snooze button too many times, or like you wake up to your alarm, you're like, it's like time to reevaluate where you're investing your energy and time. And then on the flip side, when you're sleeping too much, you're like, you got to get your butt back in gear. So I'll just use that as my check-in example.
I want to ask a follow-up question, because you said for you it's not a risk. So what do you think is a risk that you've taken?
In this exact moment, I think you get bits and pieces of it, Cecilia, but it's like being in relationship. I think being in a personal relationship is like such an incredible playground for growth and learning. And so I would say my commitment to keep showing up amidst all the signals and signs of like, is a risk in some ways. I'm gonna popcorn. I can popcorn to Miss Louisa.
Can you guys hear me? So I guess this is a risk that I'm taking in the next week, is flying, because for me, that's been like something I've been like, I don't know if I'm gonna go. My partner, I was telling Beth, my partner is moving to Memphis, where I'm based, and so I'm going to get him, help him move from Seattle to Memphis and have been like, oh, I'm not gonna go, like he'll just go. And so we decided we're gonna do it. So that's a big risk that I have calculated in recent days, but I think that the risk will be worth the reward. I will be very safe, and you know, you guys can please feel free to send me some good energy, because I imagine that it'll be a bit more stressful than already stressful travel can be. Yeah.
On the positive side, you'll have the plane all to yourself. You'll probably like fly it too, right?
Yeah, probably not too many people on the plane. Hopefully, we'll see.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm gonna popcorn. I'll popcorn to Mike.
Thanks, Lisa. I'm excited that you're taking the biggest risk of your life in the next like couple weeks. That's awesome. I think I've realized as I was thinking about this since the question was posed, how different your relationship to risk is as you get older and have a family and kids. And I've realized how unconsciously I've managed risk over the last several years. and so when I think about it, the way I thought about risk and the way I might answer that question a long time ago, or even, 5 years ago, I realized in some ways how thoroughly I manage risk every day by being fairly careful, because I'm in a lot of ways afraid of upsetting what I feel to be like a safe situation for my kids in particular. And so in some ways, I think the way I think about risk now is more it's not a big immediate decision that you make, like I'm going to take this risk. It's more the steadiness of accepting or allowing or designing what's considered kind of steady state every day. Here's what I'm doing. So this is where I'll live. These are the people I'm doing this with. This is who I work with. This is the role I see for myself in these communities. And that's more of an everyday acceptance than a big risky decision. And to me, that is a different kind of risk, but it's the one that I'm most in tune with. I will pass to Balto.
All right, thanks, Mike, for passing on. So, yeah, I guess that it's also like there's so many ways to think about this question, but I think that anyway, for the context, I guess it's still taking that entrepreneurial risk over and over again. Anyway, feels like it's also a question why to keep doing that, because like I remember the first time doing and kind of like first entrepreneurial experiences were more like in the safety of parents, so it wasn't that risky. So I it was not financial risk, and then when going like committing to becoming an entrepreneur like seriously first time, then that felt like I put so much things, my decision dependent on many other things, without making like I'll just do it, but I'll say I will not do this unless A, B, C, D, and if this go this way, then I'll do it. But if I do it, I'll commit to fully, and that was kind of the thing. But it's still like you can experience that more than once if you choose to go yet much more difficult thing to solve. So, because making it financially sustainable and not dependent on anyone's pocket and solving crazy problems is scary, because like why there's so many more easier things to do. Why do this? And I have kids. I have 4 kids. So when I'm doing that, I know that I'm not alone of putting things in risks there, but balancing that anyway. So one of those were also starting my first business in US when I had never even visited the country. I just packed myself to the plane, didn't have a visa with visa waiver. I went to, to California, started putting the company together with the lawyer, and, then I stayed there for 4 years running that business. So anyway, it's always interesting. So I have to go with my entrepreneurial risk taking. So I'll popcorn to Richard.
Hey, biggest risk. For me, I don't think it was being an entrepreneur and working for myself. That came naturally. I think it's making the decision to go and be okay with not physically being here. Like, I'm going to go and travel the US and do a road trip and go travel the world right after I move out of the apartments I'm in now to my new apartment. Because I realized that welcome to global pandemic season, you can work from anywhere with internet. And so might as well make the most of it and go see the world while I do it. And so that's a little scary and a big risk, but also it forces me, it's a forcing function to make sure I have all my ducks in a row and make sure that my team can continue to operate and do everything that the company, the business needs to do, even without my involvement, because I'll have less time available to commit 30 hours a day to doing the thing. And so that forces me to set up processes and automate and delegate and build a company and a business that runs itself so I can work on the business, not in the business. And that's been a forcing function, which is a big risk and a lot of work, but ultimately rewarding because I get to go and have fun and enjoy myself. I'm gonna popcorn to Andy.
Feels like therapy here.
Right.
Biggest risk. I would say actually doing this work right now that we're doing to further what's called ecosystem building today. If I go back to when I was introduced to it by accident 20 years ago, I decided to trust my gut versus do the thing that was more clear and obvious, like get a regular job. And that led me down a path over 20 years to get to the point where this thing actually has a name, and there's people that want to log into a Zoom call and talk about the vision for it as a field. But 20 years ago, I mean, I didn't even know it had a name. It was just like, oh, this is fascinating and interesting. And so probably, I mean, I think I started, I can't remember, it's 6 or 7 organizations and companies that have been playing with this idea, and then got invited to work at Kaufman. But like, obviously my 22-year-old self had no idea any of that was possible. So that was a big risk, paying off. Got to know all you all. So that's been cool. I will go to, Brett, did you go?
No, I haven't gone yet.
Great, you're next.
Thanks, Andy. So similar to probably what I missed with a few people starting, mine was an entrepreneurial journey. And I had spent 7 years teaching American history at the high school level and moved from Maryland to North Carolina and had kind of a skeleton idea from my hometown. My friend's father had started, and I said, I think we can make this work in North Carolina. Didn't know North Carolina, didn't have any connections here whatsoever, and didn't know the field at all. It was durable medical equipment this is from US history. So my brother-in-law kept his full-time job, but he jumped into it with me, and I went full-time into it, full commission. There was nothing, and for 9 months, I didn't make a sale. It was brutal. And we lived with my wife's parents. We had just moved down here, and we got pregnant with our first baby and did all these things. And I'm like, what am I doing? So after like a little over a year, I ended up pulling the ripcord and going back to education. So full failure in the immediate, but man, I'll tell you, like, there's very few things I look back on, especially doing the work I do now, that have shaped me more and informed my understanding more than that year, as depressing as it was. And I got to tell you this. So we got this guy as a puppy. like the month before I started that journey, and he was with me every day. He just sat next to me, and so we have this permanent bond. He's 13 now, and he's an old man, and now I'm home again for this, and so he's right by my side all the time. So it's a pretty neat little bookend to that. I am going to look at the list here. Who else has not gone? How about a hand raise if you haven't gone yet? Oh, come to you, Cecilia.
Thanks, Brett. I want to thank you all for sharing all of this, because I think that it helps put us in a good frame of mind to think about all the people that we're creating this vision and mission for, or all the people that have taken a risk to go on this journey with us, right? So, so I think it's helpful. So thank you. So in the year that I was getting a divorce, I went from a steady gig in the groups and meetings department of Avis and Budget, so pretty established organization, to taking a commission only gig in timeshare in Tulsa, Oklahoma. So that was pretty risky. To think about being a commission only salesperson in timeshare in Oklahoma was like, what are you thinking? I realized it was the biggest psychology class I've ever taken. I learned so much about human behavior and mindset and all of those things. Then the other time would be when I was 50, left a soul-sucking job, and embarked on a journey to become an entrepreneur, which ended up being recognized as, oh, maybe you're a better ecosystem builder than you are an entrepreneur. Like, why don't you do this? And ending up here. So, so that was kind of mind blowing to think about the fact that that there was life after 20 plus years in an industry, to leave everything that I knew and structure and start over. So, so there was that. Eric.
I will unmute myself because that's part of the practice we use here in this crazy room. Let's see. Yeah, good question. Very, pondering a lot. I think a lot of the things that seem like risks, maybe in retrospect, were like, how could you not make that choice? Like, so I think the risk of staying in a place, I think that felt riskier in some previous decisions, like joining Forward Cities or things like that. Was like, how could you not do X? But the one that I'll share is I was putting together one of these community, like a startup week kind of event, I think toward the beginning of when they, oh, thanks so much, Cecilia. When they started doing the startup weeks, we had like a creative community kind of thing. And I took a risk and leaned in, and it, I don't know. I think it exposed some of the weaknesses in our ecosystem and some of the relationships, and damaged a few of those. I think we came up with something good that, paid off in other ways. But boy, I think looking back on it, I wish I'd approached the risk a little more thoughtfully, and socialize that with a few of the other partners. I don't know, it's all very vague, but I will leave it at that, and I will kick it over to Beth.
Thank you, Eric. Hi, everybody. It's great to hear all of these stories. So I've had some time to think about it, and there's so many. I am totally a risk taker apparently, but I guess the biggest risk I've taken is making the decision to jump out of an executive position and dive in full steam ahead, volunteering for a year to create the entrepreneurial ecosystem building function here. And probably if I would have known what I was getting into at the time, I would have slowed down my decision-making process at least. So in that, I will popcorn over to Scott.
Thanks, Beth. I think the biggest risk that I've ever taken is probably joining this call with this mustache. I'm not sure if it's paying off or not. I don't know if it's presenting, you know, my true self in this moment, but giving it a shot. To answer the question more seriously, my partner is in grad school at Princeton and taking the decision that I would stay in Ohio while they are, you know, in New Jersey for 3 years is, it doesn't feel like a risk exactly kind of in the day-to-day because the stakes aren't super defined, but definitely a challenge. And I think it's Hassan.
Thanks, Scott. Cecilia, I think you and I have shared a similar experience many years ago. I sold timeshares. So it was a 90-minute one-on-one psychological experiment every time you talk to someone. So can you all hear me well? Cool. Biggest risk, I think, for me was, I took a big risk at the start of this year by leaving a position I was in for almost a decade and joining Forward Cities. But I'd always moved around like my entire life. I was never in one place in terms of living somewhere. I was always moving around. I was traveling a lot and never was really still, and was involved in a lot of different entrepreneurial pursuits. So I think probably the biggest risk for me was probably slowing down and settling and staying put for a period of time, because the moving around was always what kept me going. So I think biggest risk for me was about 10 years ago. I settled down in terms of I got married, and I also started a new job at the same time that I was in for almost 10 years. So stayed put for about 10 years was probably the biggest risk, but well worth it.
Great. Thank you so much, Hassan. I feel like we need to probably turn it over to Scott. So the link, and we shared this earlier so that you might have a chance to think about this. But I think what we landed on was each of us who took a stab at synthesizing this would share, and then Scott is being asked to task on the ultimate canvas thing. So how did you suggest we proceed, Scott?
I think if each of us that kind of took a shot at synthesis, or each team can kind of quickly move through their major observations or sticky points, and then we can kind of have a group conversation around that to see what we're aligned on, what we still have some questions about. I think that would be an ideal way to go.
Let's start with Beth and Hassan.
I had to get back to unmute. Hassan, you want to go first?
Sorry, I've got to pull that file up real quick.
Do we want to share the screen or just have, yeah, can somebody do that?
So this is the group synthesis page. There are tabs on the bottom that have each of our individual highlights, and you can kind of scroll in if you have that. And then we were going to get to a high-level question thing, but I'll keep it on this page. Go ahead.
Cool.
A very quick clarification also. We are drawing a lot of this information out of the Canvas document, or the sandbox, sorry.
Yeah.
Yes, go ahead.
I was just going to say, maybe for everyone on the call's benefit, we could talk a little bit about how the process worked. Or are you thinking we don't have time for that, Celia?
I would just,
I think
there's
we
a
could
couple
do 2
new
minutes.
people or people that haven't been on the call for a while, so it might help just to make sure. For maybe Cecilia just to, or Mike, I don't know who's the right person, but what have we done before? Where are we going, just to make sure?
Let me share the sandbox document so that you have a link to it that everyone can look at in their leisure, and maybe Mike can.
Sure, and I do think we want to get into this as quickly as we can, but I'll just give a quick overview of where we are.
Because there's a couple new folks that are joining us.
Sorry, Andy, what was that?
I was just going to say just 1 minute of it, just because there's a couple people
right.
who haven't been on the call for a couple months. And I think there's actually a couple new people.
Agreed. Yep. So the hope for this ongoing conversation, and by ongoing, it's several versions of ongoing. It's weeks and months old as well as years old, but trying to understand what it might look like for this group to put a version of something out there into the world around a shared vision for the field, and then trying to use a future ESHIP gathering in particular to get input on that, but really trying to take a bold step and to put something out there and say, what if this is the one beyond any particular institution? Can this hold up as a vision for our field? And so to get to that process, Valto had suggested a canvas that he had co-created, I believe, that's in the Commons, the Creative Commons, which really ties together the pieces from defined measurable goals, SMART goals, to a mission, the values. It's really putting all those pieces in one place, and in particular, the vision, and so and the why, or core purpose. So wanting to try and answer some of those, we split into a few small groups, pairs really, to try and take a shot at that. What emerged was that the pieces that I think people have tried to dig into based on all of previous input from across many different sessions is to try and really focus on the values, that core purpose, or why, why are we doing this? And then what's our vision? And some people have framed that as a goal. So what's that way out there goal, possibly right on the edge of being achievable or not, that we might potentially put forward as a vision? What are the values that collectively we believe underpin our community and hold us together, and that we might, again, put out there? And what's our core purpose for being? Again, some ambiguity between mission, the why, the core purpose, but really those pieces being central, and then figuring we could fill in from there. So teams have taken shots at that through several conversations. We've been trying to come down to a synthesis process, and one where we take iterations along the way, and really our core principle has been to share our work along the way, because all of that is useful and might eventually come back around. And the place we're at in terms of that whole process is that 3 teams have taken various slices at this, and today we're sharing back where we are. What we're trying to get to eventually is one aligned version of Valto's canvas that says, here's the whole picture, here's the framing language, here's something that we think is worth putting out there for the field to see if we can get feedback and ideally some alignment and ownership.
Thanks, Mike. I would also just add 2 quick things, which is the whole process is built on the notion that a community-informed vision is much more compelling and more true than if somebody just went in the back room and wrote it. And then secondly, diversity in perspective actually creates the emergent activity that allows us to create something that not one of us could have created. And so that sandbox document actually synthesizes hundreds of people's input that has come through the ESHIP Summit and various other ways that have taken input. And that all you and the collection of the folks here are then part of that synthesis and making sense of that. And then now we're getting closer and closer. And then thank you for Valto for providing and sharing your framework to make us figure out how to anchor the thing to the ground. So I just want to applaud and thank everyone for participating in the process of narrowing and focusing and synthesizing and sharing divergent and convergent perspectives.
So in the interest of time, and just to let you know that the idea is that we could get to a draft of this vision that we can share out widely when we reconvene in the fall. So so that's the goal, to put together something, because otherwise we're going to be, you know, working on this, thinking through this forever in little groups and pockets. So so welcome to input. Christine, will you help us with a time thing and just make sure that each team speaks for no more than, I don't know how many minutes to make sense?
I think if we can do 2 or 3 minutes each team, then we can.
Okay, so Christine has a great tool to remind us how long to speak for. Okay, so if you start seeing it, start wrapping up. Beth and Hassan.
Hassan, go right ahead.
Yep. So for us, I think the thing that we really grappled with was, are we looking at creating a vision for folks that already identify as ecosystem builders, or are we looking at something much broader than that, something that resonates with folks who are in traditional economic development, who may be in other fields and don't even recognize they're ecosystem builders? So the language that resonates was really important to us. And I think we went back and forth a lot about what are the values, and is the vision statement something that people are aspiring to, or is it a vision statement for people that already recognize themselves as ecosystem builders? So is it something that, you know, much broadly people can look at, and even if they know nothing about the field, can identify with the statement and work towards something, or is it something that is defining what we already recognize as what our end result should be? Sorry, I just lost the document.
I'll put it back up after we share out so that people can look at it. Beth, do you have something to add?
It's just the conversations were really stimulating, and the reframing conversation around, you know, there are ecosystems all around us, and specifying in this great work that we've all done over the past 3 years that this is focused on entrepreneurial ecosystem building, but keeping in mind as the field builds how this relates to other verticals is cool.
Do we want Scott to go, or Christine and I go?
I think we should go next, Cecilia, and then kind of let Scott. Yeah.
Okay, go ahead, Christine.
Oh, I'd say for us, and I think the way that Cecilia and I approached it kind of were 2 different ways. I basically kind of went through the group sandbox and kind of synthesized, kind of like what Andy was saying, there's so much diversity in perspectives and how much actual alignment there actually is as well. And so the way that I did it was kind of go through everyone's comments and kind of synthesize them at the bottom in terms of my individual doc. And then for Cecilia and I, when we did our kind of together synthesis, just really understanding ecosystem building as both the approach and also like the actual role and function of it. And so being able to understand that ecosystem building is actually a component that every role of a player in an ecosystem actually can use and leverage. It just depends on how much they're aware of it and also how much that skill has been exercised. And so I kind of joke in my like layman's terms of talking about ecosystem building. It's like if we're training people to be ecosystem builders, we're actually just training people to be good humans, because you're training people to enter any environment or any city or community with curiosity and openness and inquisitiveness of asking good questions and listening, and then being able to see what gaps exist to then reflect that back to the community and say, okay, this is a gap. I can either fill it, or it's a role that could be a temporary role, but it helps accelerate all of our collective work. And it's a really unifying role that helps. And so I think instead of trying to think about ecosystem building as just a role that we're fitting underneath the economic development umbrella, there's a wider way of us looking at it. Cecilia, anything you want to add?
Yeah, so we, as Christine shared, we synthesized in a different approach. And so I took a lot of the information that was shared on the inputs in the documents and I bucketed things more. So I took the phrases and terminology that was put out there and kind of labeled it under, this is a perspective, these are actual actions and things like that. So it's a little more segmented that way, but clumped together. And what I'm keep coming back to more so is ecosystem building to me has really evolved in the conversation that it's a skill that's an add-on or a or something that's flexed more than it is an actual job title. Ecosystem builders are this. It's more of ecosystem builders do this. So it is definitely more of an action verb, and anybody could be an ecosystem builder. It's whether or not you hone and flex that muscle, which makes it a lot more inclusive in thinking about who does this, or as opposed to who does what equals this job description. So Scott and Mike.
Hi, everyone that I haven't met before. I'm Scott. I've been kind of in orbit around some of this ecosystem building work and ESHIP, but I have not been as heavily involved and deep in this as a lot of you have. So I'm kind of coming with relatively fresh eyes and trying to help make some sense. So my approach was very similar to Christine's, where I went through kind of all of those questions and queries and tried to make sense of where everyone was coming through all of this. I would say one of the major things that I kind of saw persistently through the sandbox document, and I think this feeds really directly into kind of mission statements, is the need or desire for clarity around what ecosystem building is. I think there is a fair amount of clarity around the goals, like what is ideally being accomplished and what the value is, but both in terms of recognition kind of the self as an actor in this system, and recognition from external sources, being able to kind of shine a light on the kind of the core principles of this seems like something that is being pretty clearly expressed throughout. And in terms of working towards a vision, it seemed to me that what the direction to go in is to kind of understand what the world will be like after this takes off, and that recognition exists and that value is proven, what the change is, and that the vision is really kind of naming that or asking the question that makes that clear to people. Mike, do you have anything to add there?
Sure. Just first of all, gratitude to all the people that have dug into this over the last several months, and in particular the last several weeks. And then also to say that, yeah, I wanted to preserve Scott's unsullied eyes, so I didn't interfere too much because it was wanted his valuable input alone. He and I have talked a little bit since he's taken that look, and just my own thinking in this same thing, looking through what people had shared and what the space was, and my own impulse is to try to look and say, what is unique to this space, what is core to this space, and yeah, what are those assumptions we're making? What if we zoom out a little bit? I mean, that's always been my impulse around this work, I think, is to try to figure out how this fits in the context of larger systems and larger aligned efforts. One or two really quick notes, specifically that top box. I think there's been a lot of conversation and trying to figure out, does this vision and everything we're articulating around this space, how specifically does it need to address and speak to and name this field of professional entrepreneurial ecosystem building? And how much might it apply to what Scott was just saying, the world, when that is the version of it that we like to see? So when we've accomplished what we want to, does that vision speak to our field, or does it speak to the effect that the field has had? And my observation is that either might be valid, and that we can really choose how we want that to go. The other thing is, I just wanted to note that on the values, same thing. Again, these are tools. These should express beliefs that say who we are and that flesh out the picture of what we believe ecosystem building is. Obviously, the language of all of this is extremely important, and there's real history to this. You know, everything that we're doing really needs to acknowledge the fact that there is colonialism, there is racism, there is structural power dynamics, there is capitalism, and finding a way to navigate that in a way that speaks uniquely who we are, and even the history of the word ecosystem. I think if we can find a way to navigate all of that and find what is it that we specifically are saying about how we want this field to go and what we believe this work actually is, and situate that in the context of the whole and do so in fewer than 5 words, then we've got it. So that was my thinking.
Fewer than 5 words. Wow, no pressure. And so opening up for questions.
Input and thoughts are also welcomed.
I'll give one more quick note, and this is not about me so much as just about something that I heard that I thought really resonated. And this is about this concept, and again, back to the language, but ecosystem builder, in particular, focusing on the word build. I know we've heard, the power of metaphor and recognizing that ecosystem is itself a metaphor. The language around build is one that has been questioned a little bit. Is that the right way of talking about our relationship with systems? In natural systems, is building the right mode for what we do? And Cecilia, I think you had a really interesting take on that, that if you could just maybe quickly clue the group in on, I thought that was a really valuable way of understanding that.
Thanks, Mike. First of all, I think that it's really late in the game to try to adopt a new phrase to become a buzzword. So so there's traction with ecosystem builder, and the way that I envision a builder is it's somebody who takes the resources at their disposal or seeks out other resources to be able to support and reinforce the things that are working. So, so being able to utilize the tools that they see, whether it's duct tape and crazy glue, or go find other tools and resources and other people to help reinforce and build the walls or the buildings or the structures or whatever. So finding that as somebody who develops and builds in that way is the approach that I've tried to share. So did that cover it, Mike?
I also, when we were talking about this earlier, if I was giving a best man speech at Ecosystem Building's wedding, I would point out that there's a second definition of build, which is the shape, proportion, and components of a thing. And I think that's kind of a valuable rounding out of that word. And if we need kind of a question to kick off some of this conversation, I wonder if the top line in Mike and I's column on the team shareouts, I wonder if people have thoughts on that, if the field's goal and vision should be specifically towards the field, or if it should be about the world, or where it might be most valuable.
I'm really curious your other thoughts, because I think it resonates with or echoes what Beth and Hassan also talked about in terms of acknowledging ecosystem building being so valuable in terms of entrepreneurial ecosystems, and then how that relates to additional ecosystems outside of that.
I can chime in on some thoughts on that one. Is just thinking about where the professional field of ecosystem building is. If you look at an adoption curve, we're still in the sort of early adopter stage of the work. I mean, we can't even agree upon the name, at least internationally. That I think we're at the stage where we want more people to adopt the approach of ecosystem building, whether they're focused on just their entrepreneurship programs, or whether they're thinking about economic development or their community as a whole. And so to me, a vision statement that captures the possibility of the work as it relates to the world, it says here, world communities and entrepreneurs, so that one, people can say, I want to do that, and then the people doing it say, oh, I do that. And that helps coalesce the networks and the groups around it. Because the underlying, I think, challenge has been around this work, from my vantage point, is that a lot of people are doing it, but there's very little consensus on just the core elements. And having a clear articulated vision that comes from this process that people can even hang their kite on, or whatever the right word is there, to say like that's what I do, helps people then identify as, oh, I know I was an ecosystem builder, but that's what I do. And I also think in the moment in time in history, as we're sort of shifting from one human era to clearly another one, it helps put a stake in the sand as to what is the role of this work in shaping whatever the next 21st century world is going to be. That's my intuition to the answer to that question.
So it seems like everybody's kind of taking it in because there's a lot. So thinking about, I think what we've asked Scott to do is to kind of take all of this information and help us with a first run at a draft, using a canvas or not using a canvas or whatever. So now the question for all of you is, what is it that you would like him to keep in mind as he approaches the work? Like, is there a charge to entrust?
Maybe I can share just again purely from a tool perspective, because having used that tool, the canvas, in different ecosystem settings, different similar exercises also, and having used that tool a lot myself, or whatnot, I can easily say that Scott will automatically create and go.
I think, Balto, we lost you there for a bit.
Okay, so I was basically just saying that that most likely there will be easier for anyone using that, even working independently, that kind of comes with let's say two, three different versions that then end up being synthesized further for one version. So I think that that's just something that feels natural when using that tool, at least myself, and in different occasions. So maybe that can be helpful in the work itself. that don't try to fight necessarily to get to one directly, but give individually room for yourself to also do a couple of versions and then try to consent from there. It's just the process perspective.
Yeah. My other thought, having done similar things to this, Scott, is just it's actually great if you run into places where there's divergence and they collide, like two things collide. And that my hope would be if you see things like, don't try to make it, don't kumbaya, everything's got to fit. It's like, oh, these two ideas are antithetical to each other. And in identifying that, I actually would hope that this group could then say, okay, we seem to disagree about this thing. And there's lots of different perspectives on it. And let's have some dialogue around that particular thing. Because I think a lot of the challenge comes in some of this work around just like, well, what did you mean when you said that? Oh, I thought you meant this. Oh, okay. Well, I mean this. And then like that dialogue is actually how you flush this out. And I think I would actually hope that there's some sort of collisions that happen within this process, but just flag it and then we can work on it as a team.
I want to put Louisa on the spot because I do that. Louisa, you've been involved in this work as an ESHIP champion last year and really dove deep into goal 3 with the team. And so you've stepped out for a little bit, you've come back in looking at this. What is it that we've left out or not? Like, what are you seeing?
And I'll be honest, like I'm trying to like read all of this and listen to people at the same time. And so I think that I may need to look at it after I get off the call to really absorb everything. But the point that it sounds like a lot of people have been making, or question that people have been asking around, like, is this the vision for the field or is it about the world? And like, I tend to think about keeping things as simple as possible. That's just my preference. I see the value in like sometimes making things more complicated, but for the use of actually like accomplishing something, I think like focusing on the field and the smaller, like more pointed like essence of what we're trying to say makes a lot of sense. And that kind of like to Andy's point, these things will continue to evolve, but we're like at a very early stage of this work. And so sometimes I think that as a group, as an ESHIP group on these types of calls, because we're so deep into the work and we're so we're very passionate about it, that sometimes we might make it more complicated than it needs to be. And yeah, and we might try to like philosophize and I don't know, like make it very deep and esoteric and cerebral. But I think that when we kind of throw something up on the wall and people are like, yeah, that seems to work, and we have a diverse like cross section of people taking a look and saying, yeah, that seems to make sense, and yeah, like that doesn't seem to be leaving me out. If we can do a good job, which I think that we have over the past several months, of getting the right people in the room and taking a look at what's on the wall and saying, yeah, that makes sense, that I don't think like we have to do more than that, right? Like if it makes sense and people are feeling like it's good, like I don't feel like we need to make this perfect for ecosystem builders 50 years from now. I think we need to make it good for ecosystem builders today.
Thanks, Louisa. Richard, you joined us recently on these calls, and you've been scrappy ecosystem builder entrepreneur without like naming it, and then you kind of came into the community. So I'm curious to hear your perspective on this too.
I think I'm just sitting here and learning and absorbing all of this, and try to navigate my way through it. I think there's a ton of great work being done, and I'm still getting my bearings and my footing here. And I think the approach of these diverse perspectives and these different voices, and this really being a community vision, community messaging really resonates with me. And so everything here is awesome, and I'm still here listening and learning and comprehending.
So what does it need to be for you?
What do you mean?
So if I mean, as all of us who are working towards creating a vision and mission for a field that you're part of,
Yeah.
right? Coming into this conversation, you want to look at the plaque on the wall that says all of the words, and what do you want it to say? Not the words particularly, but how do you want to feel in reading those words?
I want to feel something that aligns with me, right? As have never called myself ecosystem builder, thought ecosystem was a 30 word, and we've had this conversation. I wanted to align with the what I feel supporting startups and supporting ecosystems and supporting communities around startups should feel like. And like, sorry, it's not more concrete, but like it has to feel good. And I think for other ecosystem builders who are just joining or new or want to join the field, something that resonates, something that is a more, throwing some tech stars into this, right? More give first view of this, something that is, hey, how do we come together and support our local ecosystems, local communities, and our global ecosystems and communities. And I think what really resonates with me is kind of like the rising tide, like raises all ships type of mentality, right? And that's what I think good ecosystem building is. Good and proper ecosystem building should be. It's not. We're all on the same team here to help support startups and ultimately individual people at the end of the day. And we're just doing it at a much larger and more impactful scale than we can do if we were like one-on-one mentoring. So at the end of the day, it comes down to helping individual people, but how we do it affects way more people than just individually doing that. So at a system level, if that makes any sense at all.
I think this is really great input. Thank you all for sharing this and kind of processing this today. Since I know we're tight on time, I have a question that you don't need to answer right now, but if you can think about it, and if anything really kind of strong pops into your head, if you can just shoot me an email maybe. What about this field and this work is the most exciting for you?
So maybe what we'll do is put that in the Slack channel. Scott, I think you're in the Goal 3 Slack, so that we can continue. Do we have a next steps or an action item for what we could do before next month or whatnot?
People to comment on the document. I don't know if some permissions need to be turned on or what for that.
No, they should be able to. I think anybody with a link, hang on, let me just double check. Anyone with a link can edit. So we're gonna ask you if you would to make it a comment so that we can track it. And then Scott, if you'll put your big question into the Goal 3 Slack, that would be great. Anything else top of mind before we wrap?
Somebody isn't on the Goal 3 Slack, how can they get into the Goal 3 Slack?
I will include you in the Goal 3 Slack. So is there anyone here who's not in the Goal 3 Slack? Oh, okay. All right.
So it sounds like Scott, when would you like to have our comments in by if we're going to add any more comments to this document?
A week.
Cool.
And I think getting them kind of staggered will definitely help me with processing too, that I can go through a journey of understanding input.
Can I ask, should the existing teams, do they want to keep working in those teams, or how do we want that to go? Or is that something to talk about after? Those 3 pairs.
And maybe we can talk data offline in Slack.
Sure, let's do that.
Just
Great.
mindful of time, but I also want to kind of let Scott marinate on this call, and then what might help getting additional input from a wider group.
Marinated
Okay.
Scott, great.
Marinated Scott, it'll be recorded. It'll be put on the dashboard. So we'll make sure that that's on there. Is there anything else?
Marinate this ultimate canvas.
Yes. Thanks, y'all.
Thanks
everybody. Bye.
Everyone, good to see you.
Richard, I'll be in touch.